My name's Chad. I'm an application scientist at the Advanced Imaging Center at HHMI Janelia Research Campus in the US. I want to thank Global Bioimaging and the management board here for not only having me here, but for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about how training at the AIC has evolved over the past several years. For those of you who don't know about the AIC, we're somewhat of a unique imaging facility because we consist only of pre-commercial microscopes that were built and developed at Janelia. And for people to normally access these sorts of instruments, they'd have to be commercialized, which can take anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So the AIC was developed to serve as an intermediary between technology developers at Janelia and biologists who want to use those technologies to answer some challenging questions. And before I dig in, I think the most interesting part about the AIC is that we're a globally open access imaging center. So anyone in the world can submit a proposal. If it's accepted, we'll bring you in for a number of weeks to use the equipment and work with us. Now, before I talk about training, I want to acknowledge a publication from Global Bioimaging that Gleb actually mentioned already, and that's, I think it very nicely articulates something that a lot of us know to be true through our own experience, and that is that imaging core facilities add tremendous value to research institutions. And frankly, to remain competitive on a global scale, they're a necessity at this point. And they're beneficial to a number of different groups. I think most obviously, the scientists at these institutions benefit because they get access to equipment and expertise, but also for the imaging core facility staff, it gives an opportunity to stay in science, to stay in research without going down the normal kind of group leader, PI sort of track. On top of this, if you think about the perspective of instrumentation developments and manufacturers, they're a fantastic place to test equipment, get feedback, engage with their user base, understand what's working, what's not, and how they can improve their technologies and better work with the community. And then even at the higher level of national decision makers and funders, they're a fantastic opportunity to strategically align the imaging infrastructure with national priorities and what the research questions of interest are for that particular country. Now, what's somewhat surprising is that there's, for all the good that core facilities have, there's relatively and comparatively little training programs specifically developed to train people in how to manage and run a core facility. That is, at least until Jennifer Waters, who we're going to hear from later today, came out with her program, the Advanced Microscopy Fellowship at Harvard Medical School. It's a unique program where she's trying to train both microscopy skills as well as core facility management skills. And it's very nicely put together in this paper that I would encourage everybody to read if you haven't already. And we saw this program as a big inspiration. We thought it was fantastic and we wanted to emulate it, but we wanted to do so in a way that took advantage of what we at the AIC do uniquely well, and that is pre-commercial instrumentation. So we launched our own Advanced Microscopy Fellowship with an initial mission of training our fellows in skills surrounding pre-commercial microscopes. Why do we feel this is important to do? Well, there's been somewhat of a mentality shift, I would say, over the past 10 or 15 years, especially since the AIC came around, where biologists and universities and higher ups in universities are becoming more amenable to incorporating pre-commercial instruments into their research workflows and into their facilities. So we wanted our fellows to, when they leave our program, not only have the skills to run a facility, but to be able to incorporate pre-commercial microscopes into that facility so that their user base can access tools that they might not have been able to access for a number of years later otherwise. And we launched this program in 2019. Michael Reika, who we've all heard from, was our guinea pig. He took the plunge. He came over to us from South Africa and was very willing to be a guinea pig. And the way we approached training our fellows, the way we thought to do this was we wanted to give ownership over one of our instruments to the fellow. In this case, it was a simultaneous multi-view light sheet system developed in Philip Keller's lab. And for a bit of perspective, when I'm talking about taking ownership over a microscope, right, for these systems, there's no service contract, there's no service engineer. If something's wrong, it's on you and your team to fix it. It's on you and your team to optimize their performance to make sure it's working as well as it can. So when you take ownership, when you're the point person on this microscope, it gives you an opportunity to learn a whole lot of skills. The microscopy skills follow very naturally. You pick up a lot on optics and alignment, on advanced microscopy methods, and even things like experimental design. How do you get the most out of this piece of equipment? And how do you know its strengths and weaknesses? How do you tailor an experiment to that specific system? But we also protect a bit of our fellows' time for explicit training in facility management. So these are things like operational management and budgeting, project consultations. How do you take a biological question and turn that into a microscopy experiments that has some quantitative output? You also get training in vendor relations. So how do you work with companies to get parts replaced, to get new parts manufactured, to tweak a microscope, building up those relationships. And then finally, very importantly, we train our fellows in grant writing, because unfortunately you have to, solicit funds and get money to bring these equipment into your system. So we want to train our fellows in those skills so that they have the ability and the know-how to bring in new tools. Now, in that time, Michael also went on and put out a number of papers, kind of went one step above and started putting a lot of this into writing. So a paper on experimental design, some work on how light interacts with specimens, which is particularly important for that system he was running. And then also something that we think a lot about at the AIC, which is challenges and opportunities of open access microscopy facilities. So at this point, we're feeling pretty great, pretty proud of ourselves. We had this mission, we had a fellow, things were going well, we're emphasizing pre-commercial microscopes, but Michael brought to us something that was extremely important, and that was a perspective shift. And I want to illustrate that through this map. So this map shows you the origin of every proposal that was submitted to the AIC from when we opened in 2014 through 2022. And this used to be a big point of pride, because we could look at this and we could say, we have proposals from every single continent except for Antarctica. Perspective shift is saying, okay, even though we're equally accessible, we're really not being equitably accessed, right? And technology dissemination can't just be for the United States and for Europe. And so as a globally open access imaging center, we felt like we had a responsibility to not just say, okay, we have a lot of proposals, we're overbooked anyways, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We wanted to understand why we weren't reaching scientists in Africa, why we weren't reaching scientists in Latin America, and really dig in and understand that and do something about it to better our own imaging facility. So the way we thought to approach this was we wanted to do a bit of a landscaping expedition. And the way that we know how to do that is by running a workshop. So we went to Cape Town, maybe selfishly, because it's hard not to want to go to Cape Town. And we ran Imaging Africa in January of 2021. So this is a continent-wide microscopy workshop. Anybody on the continent could submit an application. If you were accepted, we'd cover your travel, we'd cover your lodging, we'd cover the cost of the workshop. And it was a great opportunity for us to start, training African imaging scientists, but it was also a great opportunity for us to talk to, leaders in the field, to talk to local scientists and understand, what are we missing? What are we not doing? Why are we not connecting with researchers all across the continents? And how can we be doing better in this space? And for a landscaping expedition like this, you can't really ask for a more clear-cut response than we got. And that is that we received 712 applications from 32 countries for 24 spots. So this was kind of a big wake-up call to us, because it was really, saying there is a dire need and an outcry even for training in microscopy, especially in resource-constrained parts of the world. And it was a pivotal moment for us at the AIC when these applications started to roll in, because what had started as this fellowship program really focused on, training one scientist at a time in our own facility has now kind of blossomed into this new perspective of we need to be doing more on a global scale and pushing training in different parts of the world. And that in turn catalyzed a much larger initiative that we'll call the Africa Microscopy Initiative, which many of you might have heard about already. But I'm going to walk through the kind of 6 pillars that make up AMI. And the first of which that anchors the first 3 teaching initiatives is the Imaging Africa Workshop, which we're going to continue to run, hopefully in different locations across the continent, not just in South Africa, with the hope that it'll spur on more regional satellite workshops. I think Allison gave a great example of how that can happen. And when you have a particularly passionate person that goes on to lead another initiative, we really want to see that happen here as well. But the unfortunate truth is you can only impact so many people at once through these sorts of initiatives. So we want to supplement this with training that's accessible at any time. And so for that, we're going to launch the Microscopy Matters webinar series. There's plenty of fantastic webinar series out there already. I can think of many, but the reason that we want to reinvent the wheel in this case is because representation matters tremendously. And we want these webinar series to be done by African imaging scientists for the African community. These are really focused on building up kind of core microscopy skills, but we also are thinking about, train the trainer initiatives and how we can incorporate that. So in this aspect of training, we have the PITCH program, which is the Partners in Teaching program. This is more kind of a fellowship sort of program where we partner imaging scientists in Africa with an imaging scientist elsewhere in the world. Together, they are given a mentor and they're tasked with running a microscopy workshop at the African Scientist Home Institution. So this is both providing training to the imaging scientists and how to run a workshop and how to organize and how to lead, but also, spurring on more of these satellite regional workshops that can hopefully help fill this need of training that's been, clearly articulated. These three are very focused on training, which is wonderful. It's why, we're all here to talk about this, but unfortunately without capacity building or infrastructure, you're kind of stuck. And so the next three pillars are really focused on building up, capacity and the amount of resources that are available. And that's anchored by the AMI Imaging Center, which we had the chance to go see yesterday. It's a sister imaging facility to the AIC. That functions very similarly. If you submit a proposal and it's accepted, you can come to the AMI imaging facility for a number of weeks, and we'll help you with that experiment, and we'll also work with you consulting on it. And for projects that are particularly interdisciplinary or collaborative, it can serve as a project incubator that provides more time for these projects to grow and really reach their full impact and their full potential. And then finally, centralized solutions like this are great. It's wonderful to have, a hub of microscopy, but we also want resources to be available locally to scientists across the continent. And so for that, we have the Program for Equipment Exchange and Reutilization, or the PEER program. So many of you know when you have a confocal microscope or a wide field microscope and a company comes out with a new version, there's like a buyback program, right? You can send that back and you can pay a small fee and get the newest version, even though your old one was perfectly fine. And the unfortunate truth is that, the companies that get these microscopes back, they have to pay something to store them. And so in many cases, it's cheaper for them to just throw them in the trash, even though they're perfectly functional. And that's a massive missed opportunity because those could be put in places that could really make use of them. And so the goal of the PEER program is to distribute these microscopes that would otherwise be trashed into places that can use them. But as we learned and heard about yesterday during the discussion of the Cape Town statement, this has to be done strategically. You can't just dump microscopes onto people without them asking for it. So we want to make sure that it's going to go into a shared facility and that there's going to be staff to support it and buy-in from the Institute to be able to run this for a number of years. So this is now, fully taken over by African scientists in UCT. And if you want to read more about it, I encourage you to check out this paper that came out a couple weeks ago, or talk to Leong, talk to Michael, Karen, Mai, anybody who's involved in this. I can assure you that they will be happy to talk for however long you want to listen. And there are some signs of early success, which is wonderful. So they put out their first call for proposals for the AMI Imaging Center and received 63 proposals from 18 different countries across the continents. And you might be at this point thinking like, okay, why is this guy from Janelia talking so much about what's going on in Africa? Why do I care so much? And there's a number of reasons, but one of them, and I think ties in very nicely with the theme of this conference, is that empowering scientists through training has actually in turn benefited us at our own imaging facility. And we can see that through this bar graph here, which is showing you the amount of proposals we got from different continents, shown in different colors, for different calls for proposals over the years. In the first 10 calls, we got one proposal from Africa. That's that one little orange bar. Since the launch of AMI, and since we've kind of started engaging on a more global scale with training, we've gotten 10 times that amount of proposals from Africa in a 10th of the amount of time. And my math degree is old, but I think that's a factor of 100 improvement. So going out and connecting with people and empowering other scientists through training in turn can be very beneficial for us in diversifying our applicant pool. Now, one thing we've also started to learn is that these are early results that we're seeing. And the sustained impact of initiatives like this really hinges on local leaders in microscopy that can continue driving, continue pushing on these movements that really keep that momentum. There's a need for local leaders who can continue pushing this. Now, the world's a big place, and Africa is one part of it. And, you know, what started as the fellowship, which turned into Imaging Africa and AMI, is now kind of blossoming out even further into different parts of the world. So in 2022, with Lionel Malacrida, who we're going to hear from later today as well, we ran Imaging Latin America in Montevideo. And then most recently, in the summer of 2023, just a few months ago, we ran California's Emerging Scientists Imaging Workshop. You might be wondering, why are we going to one of the wealthiest states in the US to teach a workshop? Well, for one, I think it's important for us to also look domestically in some cases. And for two, as Allison mentioned, you know, a lot of the same problems that people are facing all across the world, we see in different pockets in the US as well. And California has a high population of first generation underrepresented students. And so we wanted to connect with them and empower them so that all the training and all the initiatives aren't just going to places like Stanford and Berkeley and these big schools. And then upcoming, we've heard about from Graham and Chinya, we have the Okinawa microscopy workshop in 2024. And we're really hoping that this is an opportunity to, you know, start to build community amongst Japanese scientists and Southeast Asian scientists, and really, you know, build up that community in a place that's been overlooked, I think, for a large period of time. Now, from a kind of curriculum development side, which we're going to talk about later on in this upcoming session, I think one of the really cool things about these workshops to me is that they're all different. It would be very easy for us to say, we have a workshop, we have a curriculum, it takes this many days, we'll come in, we'll teach it if you want. But I think it's more impactful to engage with the community, to listen to the applicants, understand what's going to be most impactful for them, and tailor the workshop specifically to where you're going. And that's what we've done for each of these. So if we take California as an example, you know, we were working with a lot of late stage undergraduate students and early stage graduate students. So we focused very much on fundamentals. We wanted to build up a sound basis of their skills in transmitted light microscopy, fluorescence microscopy, start getting them thinking about quantitative image analysis early on, and also really ingrain in them the importance of accuracy, reproducibility, and reporting. But the other thing that we didn't think about until we started reading all the applications that were coming in is that a lot of these first generation students aren't really sure what their career path can look like and what sort of options there are in science that involve microscopy. So we really dedicated several discussions with them after learning that to, you know, talking about careers, talking about where you can go with this. And we're able to kind of quantitatively make a difference in how people viewed their career outlook and how microscopy can be incorporated into that. And so I think that's a nice, powerful example of the importance of listening to your audience when you're starting to develop curriculums for these workshops.
So tomorrow,
these are all very outward-looking things, and I think it's very important to push microscopy and for us to go out and do training initiatives out away from Janelia. You know, we've heard a lot about the issues with
because you're not going again
to programs like this, so I think it's nice that we're able to go and train where people are instead of asking them to come to us. But we also do host things at Janelia that take advantage of the resources we have.
That's why
we have a kind of more comprehensive microscopy workop that takes advantage of all the microscopes we have and really covers over 2 weeks a lot of different techniques. And we also are running upcoming with Leong and Karen and Lionel Malacrida this workshop, or sorry, conference rather, on technology.
All right, thank you very much. Very well. You did very well, and thank you.
Now, I would want to return briefly to something that I mentioned before I started talking beyond Africa, and that is that for the sustained impact of a lot of these things, you need local leadership. And so as we're learning these lessons, we're starting to think about how we can incorporate those skills into our fellowship program. And so the kind of the secret behind a lot of these initiatives that I've told you about is that most all the workshops are organized, spearheaded, you know, taken on our side by our imaging fellows. So Michael, myself, Hari, and Mai have been the point people on these workshops like Imaging Africa and Imaging Latin America. And so we're able to not only go out and train scientists across the world, but we're also able to train our fellows in what it means to organize and teach a workshop and lead on kind of a global scale. And this isn't done, just through workshops. It's also done through joining networks and engaging with the community. So joining things like ABIC and different working groups. And also, I think it's important that we push our fellows to engage with other teaching initiatives, like Widening the Lens with Brian in the back. People approach teaching very differently. And so I think it's important for our fellows to engage with those other initiatives and understand different approaches to education. A piece of information that I've left off here is where all of our fellows are from. Myself, I'm from just a couple hours drive from Janelia in Virginia. Michael and Mai come to us from Africa, specifically South Africa and Egypt respectively, and Hari comes to us from India. And so not only are we trying to instill this global perspective in our fellows and this kind of thought that how can I use my position at Janelia to impact as many people as possible beyond myself, but we also want them to bring perspective to us. I think we learned that lesson very clearly through our first fellow. And so if you don't see your part of the world represented here, then we specifically want to hear from you and understand your perspective also. And with that, to kind of distill down, I wanted to emphasize how training has evolved at Janelia over the years. We started with this fellowship program where we're trying to train facility managers that can do things right. They can run a sound core facility. They have the skills needed to go and do that, to get funding, to make reproducible scientific microscopy experiments. From that came, a change in perspective to thinking more globally. And through things like HHMI, through things like Latin America, we've changed a little bit our framing and are really trying to build up leaders who are looking to do things right. So fellows that have the perspective to identify problems in different areas of the world, and somewhat of the willingness to think that we can do something about them. And so with that, I really want to acknowledge all of the different funding agencies that have supported a lot of these programs over the years, and our collaborators, both in industry, in academia and different networks that we've worked with on these programs, and a big thank you to everybody for listening. And I would love to take any questions. Thank you.